While Democrats and Republicans have been painting themselves as very different during the campaign, will it really make a difference in the way government goes after the election? We'll talk about that next on Global Perspectives.
This program is made possible, in part, by funding from the UCF Global Perspectives Office, the Global Connections Foundation, and the India Center at UCF.
This is Global Perspectives with Pulitzer Prize-winning commentator John Bercia.
Welcome to Global Perspectives. The end of the 2012 presidential campaign will come as a relief for some. The never-ending spin of partisan ads, campaign speeches, and the he said of the debates leaves many of us asking, what are the real issues? And what can any president really do about them? Our guest today, Stephen Wayne, is an expert on the American presidency and will help us sort that out. Welcome to the show, Dr. Wayne.
Thank you.
Your most famous work is probably The Road to the White House. What's the road to the White House been like in this political season?
Well, the road to the White House has been more similar than it has been different in this political season. We had some changes, the primary one being the super PACs and the amount of money that is going to be spent or has been spent on this nomination and presidential election. We're going to spend almost $6 billion on the federal elections, with a little less than half of it on the presidential race. So that's a big up, and if we're in a recession now, that spending is probably better than not better.
But some people complain that such excessive spending seems ridiculous in these times. Where does it end?
Well, it's ridiculous in the sense that it gives people with money a louder say and more influence than people without money, and that, of course, is undemocratic. But on the other hand, it does allow those with means to pay for the election, and a lot of the spending conveys knowledge. The problem with it is that it also conveys falsehood, and it over-exaggerates claims. But, you know, we have a First Amendment and freedom of speech, and that's all protected. So I think the problem is that you need money to run, and that the playing field for many people is not level. But I'm not sure the big expenditures are going to be the difference in the election. I don't think Mitt Romney won the Republican nomination because he spent more than his opponents combined, which he did. And I don't think in the general election money is going to decide the outcome.
So for you, have there been any surprises in this campaign? And what do you consider the high points and the low points so far?
Well, I would have to say I think the president has run a very skillful campaign. If we look at the environment in which the election is occurring, the economic environment, of course, has not been particularly favorable to the president since he's taken office, and we have not had a strong recovery. Our country politically is divided. There are just about as many people who identify as Democrats as Republicans, so that doesn't favor one side or the other. And yet the president seems to be doing well. So what do we explain his doing well by if he can't really show concrete accomplishments in the economy or within the society? Well, we associate that with a strong campaign. There have been three major factors in the campaign that have really worked to the president's advantage. The first factor is that he did what George H.W. Bush did in 1988 and what George W. Bush did in 2004. He defined his opponent before his opponent had a chance to define himself. And of course, he defined Mitt Romney negatively as a investment capitalist, a person without feeling, a person without empathy for poorer Americans. And Romney didn't come back with a biography and statement of his own that clearly defined him in the eyes of the general public. So that would score one for Obama. The second thing that Obama did was that he created a mindset that it was the middle class against the wealthier in this election. If you recall, for many years, the Democrats were hampered by the fact that they were viewed as a liberal, big-spending government party. And the word liberalism today isn't very popular. More than twice as many people consider themselves conservative or moderate than consider themselves liberal. There are two Democrats recently who've won, and both of them have won by getting in the middle and pushing the other party basically into right field. And Obama was successful in doing that, and of course Mitt Romney has made some verbal errors which has, in a sense, allowed the Obama stereotype to prevail. The statement he made to fundraisers about 47% not paying taxes, and we don't have to worry about them because they're not going to vote for us. I mean, that reinforces what Barack Obama had been saying all along. The third aspect of the Obama campaign that's been so effective has been that they have built on their ground and internet campaign in 2008, and they've amassed a great body of data from which they target messages to individual groups of voters. Now, we weren't sure this time around whether such a campaign would work, because the one thing you had in 2008 that you don't have a lot today is enthusiasm for candidates. And yet it seems to have worked. And that enthusiasm really got generated at the Democratic convention. And President Obama owes a lot to President Clinton for generating that debate. So typecasting your opponent, framing the issues in a favorable way, and then running a very effective ground and internet campaign seems to have made the difference so far in this election.
So you would see that as a high point on the Democratic side?
Yes, and the other high point is not making mistakes. Unfortunately for Mitt Romney, the mistakes that have been made and have been highlighted by the media have all been made by him, whether it was the trip he took to England and then to Israel and Poland, whether it were the choice of Paul Ryan, which actually forced Romney into a kind of mixed message. Instead of saying the problem is we have high unemployment and not enough jobs, attention switched to the budget and to Medicare, from which he does not benefit. And certainly the statement that has come out about the 47%, and he made another, I think, terrible error. And that was his criticism of President Obama right after our ambassador in Libya and 3 other diplomats were killed. Not that what Mitt Romney said was incorrect or something that could not be debated. You do need a foreign policy debate. But you never criticize a president during crisis, because during crisis we rally around our leader. So it's not so much what he said, but when he said it, that showed a kind of naivete, not really understanding the presidency. Romney has dug a hole for himself. Now, Obama's helped in the digging, but clearly he's dug a hole for himself, and he's showed his inexperience. But the one thing Mitt Romney doesn't seem to be, at least to me, is a natural politician. Interacting with people doesn't come naturally to him. And you don't see the warmth, you don't see the empathy, you don't see the caring. I mean, who ever thought, given Barack Obama's distance and the fact that he's not very emotive, that he would look to be the warmer candidate in this election?
You mentioned Bill Clinton and his presentation. There are many who have called that the best speech of the entire campaign period. How did Clinton's speech help energize the Democrats, and what influence does that have on the overall campaign?
Democrats would have voted for President Obama, but they weren't enthusiastic about him. Some people felt that he hadn't pushed hard enough on Democratic issues, Democrats in Congress felt he wasn't a very active hand in trying to twist arms and gain votes. There were a lot of grievances, and part of them were the result of high expectations, and part of them were the result of a very divided government and a divided electorate. Whatever that was, what you need in this election is a strong support from your base. Because even though there are a lot of people who say they're independent, most of them lean in a partisan direction. So both sides are trying to maximize their base of support. Bill Clinton got the Democrats excited. And when Bill Clinton got the Democrats excited, that increased contributions, that increased the number of volunteers, that changed public perceptions among the Democrats. It just juiced up the base. And one of the things this election lacks is juice. One of the things President Obama has been accused of is spending a lot and having little to show for it. What Bill Clinton ticked off were Obama's achievements. He just lined them up. He said, this is all the stuff he's done. And we tend to forget about that because in bad economic times or in mediocre economic times, it's the economy that's the issue, and you don't see all the little things that have occurred which either have prevented the economy from getting worse or which have been benefits and helped people domestically or helped our country in terms of its foreign relations.
You were talking about independents. There seems to be the perception that the independents as a group are growing very rapidly, but what is the actual percentage that are true independents?
Well, about a little over 40% of the population say they're independent, but there is a low opinion, an adverse and unfavorable opinion of both parties. So a lot of people don't want to connect themselves with the parties if they don't have a good opinion of the parties. So of the about 40% who say they're independent, our best estimates is that less than 10% of the population are truly independent. Now, the more independent you are, the less likely you are to vote. Most people who are independent are not into politics, which is in part why they're independent. Of the people who are likely to vote, only about 3 to 5% are truly independent, could vote one way or the other, which is why both campaigns are emphasizing getting their partisans to vote and rather than getting the independents to vote. Now, one point that I made before is an important point here. The fact that Romney chose Ryan, the fact that Obama was able to draw a wedge issues, us against them, middle class versus upper class or wealthier people, enabled the Democrats to move into the center. And that constricted Romney's base. And as we move into the election, Romney's problem is that he's held his base, but he hasn't expanded beyond it. And that so far in this campaign has been the difference. And now, as he runs into problems, that base is actually falling a little bit.
You were talking about issues in the campaign, and now because of international developments, there's more of a focus on what's happening outside the United States. Do you think this will continue, and how much of an impact will it have on the campaign?
I think it will continue a little bit, particularly if the economy just sort of stays level, because that's not news anymore. And what happens abroad is something different, and it is newsworthy. In the short run, regardless of who's president, international crises work to the incumbent's advantage because we rally around our leader in time of crisis. But saying all that, it's very important to understand that Americans have become more self-centered than they were, let's say, 10 years ago, and there is not a support of a majority for a military involvement anywhere in the world unless there's an egregious threat to U.S. security. So there is no major public support in the United States to aid, let's say, the rebels in Syria. there's not a lot of public support to put more troops into the Middle East. But there's another issue. It's kind of a humorous issue. And that is by making a few false statements and not doing well on his foreign trips abroad, Romney has not given us a lot of evidence that he would be a good foreign policy maker and a good person to direct foreign policy. And in a subtle way, the Democrats have pointed to him and to Paul Ryan, who doesn't have a lot of experience in foreign affairs, and said, well, you guys don't have the experience really to be president. Remember 4 years ago when Barack Obama was accused, first by Hillary Rodham Clinton, and later by John McCain as lacking experience. And now the Democratic campaign, ironically, is, do you want to spend another 4 years training someone to be president in foreign affairs?
In terms of the election itself and its aftermath, will it make any difference as far as the functioning of government and what we've been dealing with in recent years, all the partisanship and the contentiousness and so forth? Is any of that going to change?
The partisanship and the contention and controversy between parties are not going to change. There is a great deal of difference between how Democrats perceive the world and the economy and how Republicans perceive the world and the economy, and there's a great deal of difference with the perceptions of the proper role of government. But saying all this, you know, we still have a major problem with respect to the deficit. We don't have enough revenue coming in for the revenue that's going out. And while people in general say we should reduce the budget, not for the benefits that they get. So that crisis, which occurred in the summer of 2011, is going to reemerge in March of 2013. Now, maybe if Barack Obama were reelected and were no longer eligible for another term because of the 22nd Amendment, maybe he'd do something which he was unable or unwilling to do in the first term, and that is make some compromises on the entitlement programs, which Democrats won't like, in order to fix these budget and deficit problems. And if he's helped by a stronger economy, he may be able to make a dent into those problems. So it may be that the political environment remains contentious, but economic improvement and some modest compromise can turn our country around. And if we feel better about the economy, we won't be so nasty against each other politically.
We saw a lot of young people turn out for the 2008 campaign and election. Are there any groups that you could point to that you think will be particularly influential in this particular cycle?
Well, there's a big movement among the Obama campaign and the Democrats to turn out a large Hispanic vote. Hispanics are a very rapidly growing group in the population, about 16.6%. So a large Hispanic turnout, and Hispanics are about 2 to 1 according to the polls Democratic, would not only help the president in this election, but it would help the Democratic Party down the line, because we found that the more people vote, groups vote for one side rather than the other, the more they continue to do that over a period of time. One of the problems the Republicans have today is they can either adhere to their ideological perspective and probably not control the government, or they can modify their perspective to the dissatisfaction of their base and become a larger party. They can't seem to do both. Demographics are working against the Republicans. Women are becoming more Democratic. Young people are 2 to 1 voting for the Democratic candidate. Hispanics are voting 2 to 1 Democratic. These are large groups within the population, and they're going to constitute an increasing proportion of the electorate. So to the extent that the Republicans appeal to their base and not to these other groups, they're going to be in worse shape politically down the road.
You were talking about how Americans are tired of war in Iraq, Afghanistan. But there are so many other international issues that reach out and touch us in the United States. And you know, you mentioned the growth of the Hispanic population. Immigration is certainly one of those. How do we convey to people the importance of these issues so that they understand that what happens beyond the U.S. borders really is of importance to them, beyond conflicts?
I think the world has gotten smaller, and we know we have gotten more interdependent. And people in the United States know that when Europe has a debt crisis, or where there's inflation in certain parts of the world, that affects us here. I think Americans are more oriented to foreign policy issues. But when you have over 8% who are unemployed, and when people over the last 4 years lost their homes and lost their job and saw their savings decrease, or in some cases gone, that becomes all-consuming, and you worry about yourself more than you worry about your interaction with others. If the American economy gets better, as I suspect it will, maybe not fast enough for most of us, but if it gets better, then these other issues become more important. We see the importance of immigration and maintaining. We see the problems of illegal immigration. We understand some of the trade issues and stuff like that. It's just that the economy domestically has overwhelmed all those problems. But I think as the economy gets better, those problems will reach a certain level in the United States, and people will be aware of that. It's not that we're anti-foreign. It's that we're focused on our domestic problems at home at the moment. And we do, I think, after every war, after World War II, after Vietnam, to some extent after the Persian Gulf War, and certainly after Iraq and Afghanistan, you go into a period for a decade where you really don't want to get your military involved in those kinds of situations. Then after a while you forget that, and we get back involved again.
In your road to the White House, you always have the version that appears before the election and then the edition afterward. What are some of the things that you're going to point to in this campaign that were noteworthy, remarkable to you?
Well, you know, I think what I'm going to do is point to some of the continuities rather than the changes. I'm going to point to the advantage that incumbents have, even in mediocre times. I'm going to point to the fact that a lot of money has been spent, but I'm going to have trouble documenting where that money affected the outcome of the election. I'm going to point to, as you said, the persistence of divisions within the population, political divisions, and show how those divisions continue to affect our evaluation of who's in government, what they do, and the role of government. And I'm going to point again, I'm going to get on one of my high horses and point again to the fact that the Electoral College is undemocratic, and that we really need to allow people in all the states, rather than in just 10, determine the outcome of this election. And one of the reasons that the big money is not going to have as favorable an impact for the people who are spending it, which is more on the Republican side than the Democrat, is that so much of the country is non-competitive, both in terms of the House of Representatives and in terms of the presidential race. That's not right. That's undemocratic, and I'm going to point to that.
Thank you for joining us today, Dr.
You're
Wayne.
very welcome.
And thank you. For Global Perspectives, I'm John Bercia. We'll see you next time.
This program is made possible, in part, by funding from the UCF Global Perspectives Office, the Global Connections Foundation, and the India Center at UCF.